Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. Research suggests that it is possible for students to either have flattened reading proficiency or regress over the summer if there is not instruction. Students are different, so the effects of summer reading loss can differ from student to student, but still, it's enough of a concern that we really, as educators, need to look at ways to reduce any potential learning loss over the summer. And different schools and different communities are doing interesting things out there in this regard. Katie Gillies. Katie is a Solution Tree author. She was on the show most recently talking about literacy and science. She's written several books with colleagues on literacy in the various core areas. And as we were talking about that, she let it slip that she also has developed a pretty awesome summer reading program while she was literacy specialist at Niles North in the Chicagoland area, along with her colleague, Beverly Zbinden. I thought it would be a really great opportunity, especially as we move into spring, what we can be doing, continuing the learning over the summer. Very excited to have both Katie and Beverly joining me tonight. Ladies, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So
And Katie.
Yes, thanks.
I'd like to ask folks such as yourself when you come on the show, how this became your area of expertise. Why this interest in creating a summer reading program? And we'll start with Bev and then we'll go to Katie.
For me, at least, a lot of it came from getting students excited about reading for themselves. And a lot of that is centered in choice. We'll talk a lot about choice probably all throughout this program, but the importance of students having a wide range of possibilities and then choosing something that they actually have an interest in, as opposed to what we were finding, let's say 15 years ago, something that maybe sat in an English department and was more geared towards classics or more geared towards the classroom when students returned from summer reading, as opposed to finding some real love and joy in a story that speaks to you, with characters perhaps that are very similar to you as a person, as a human being.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Bev, because off mic, I had the opportunity to talk with Katie, and Katie actually shared with me one of your sample reading lists, and we're definitely going to talk about it. I was very impressed with the breadth and the diversity of books that you were having your students read over the summer. So we're definitely going to talk about that. I could definitely see how some of those titles in the list that Katie shared with me can really get students excited because they weren't your typical books that an English department might assign students over the summer. So I appreciate you saying that. How about you, Katie? What got you interested in creating a summer reading program for your students?
I am deeply passionate about creating opportunities for students to read, to pick up any text. And it doesn't need to be a novel, but I do think it is absolutely critical for students to see themselves in text, which is what Bev was just discussing. There's this saying that we want books to be mirrors and windows and sliding doors for our students. And that is just something that I think we all really need to take to heart. If you go back and think about a book that you picked up and loved at any age, or even a film. Point is a story, something that you identified with, fiction, nonfiction, anything. There was some element of that text that you identified with, or even non-traditional text. We can talk about that with our list later, because there's some fun surprises on there and some ways that we've been kind of pushing the envelope a little bit on what is a book and how do we ask students to engage in text. Just because I pick up a book that I connect with does not mean that that's going to be an opportunity that a student is going to, or that you may. Pushing that lens to create opportunities for all of our students to find that opportunity to connect is so critical. I started as an English teacher, and it just never felt right having kids come back to my classroom. Clearly, they didn't read the book. A few did, and maybe some kids really connected with it, but did they read it? Even if they read it and they had to take a quiz on it, how did they do on it? Was it authentic? It never sat well. This felt like an approach to try. And it started as a district initiative. Let's start summer reading. It was a trend at the time. Kelly Gallagher, who many people listening to this will probably know, he's still publishing these great lists of things to pick up and read on the regular basis. But he wrote a book called Read Aside. That was a book that I remember reading at the time, and that really spoke to me and gave me some ideas. And Bev and I started collaborating around this project and many others. Bev is my literacy partner in crime. We're always in cahoots working on something.
In looking at the list and the materials you gave me, Katie, in preparation for our conversation tonight, it does definitely look like, yes, it's very exciting and interesting for students, the selections that you have on that list, but I can imagine the amount of work that goes into this project. It's good that you're in it together. On that note, it's obvious the passion that both of you have for reading, literacy, and getting kids, as I believe it was Bev saying, feeling that joy in reading. Why is it important to have summer learning opportunities like this? Katie, and then we'll go to Bev.
Spoke a little bit at the start, preventing what's referred to as the summer slide. We want to create opportunities for students to remain engaged with text. Reading is going to be obviously the top way to prevent that from happening. We want to work on growing vocabulary skills. We want to work on comprehension. And the one thing about reading a text in its entirety, whether it's a short story or a full piece, is that we're working on flexing all comprehension muscles, really. We're working on that cycle from beginning to end, compared to just reading a snippet and then stopping, reading things in piecemeal, where we're not really getting that full comprehension cycle. And that I'm not advocating for saying everyone needs to read a 500-page book, but it's about understanding a full comprehension cycle. And that's really important. It's why when we talk about early literacy, even before we talk about some of the early decoding, storytelling is so important because it's really focusing on these concepts of comprehension. That's one reason why we want to keep our students reading and actively engaged. 2, finding obviously identity within that story. There's also going to be this broader community piece, which we've been able to find in our school through this work as well.
How about you, Bev? What's the why?
With the list that we've put together, I mean, we're very mindful about covering a lot of genres and a lot of different representation on the lists. It's a gateway. I mean, if a student who's a reluctant reader takes a chance and picks up a graphic novel or a manga, it's the start of something. If they're energized by it, they enjoy it. A lot of times our manga series are volumes and volumes long. They can continue with the series. And so, I mean, our hope is always not just that they're finding joy in this one particular book, but that it opens up doorways to them to other things that they could potentially read, or maybe to genres that they haven't explored before. Could be the start of something much bigger for that student.
And I'm really excited to ask this next question. What books, manga, graphic novels do you normally have on the list? How does it differ from the traditional summer reading list? Because I found some of your titles really fresh surprises. And then as I looked at the list, I went, yeah, students would be really interested in that. And some of those texts would not be texts that you would think would be on a summer reading list. How do you decide on what goes into your summer reading list? And if you could share with our listeners what has been on the list for the last couple of years.
Before we dive into what the actual structure of the genres of the list, I just want to note that we don't do it alone. Our committee has evolved over the years. That is a really key piece, because if we were only looking through our own lenses and building this list, we would actively be advocating against the work of the program and the mission of. So we bring in so many different staff members participate in this program. Students make nominations for books. Faculty makes nominations for these books. People scout scour different lists to get ideas. And then we have lots of different readers. People participate and support the program at the committee level in different ways. Turns out they will read anything and everything. And you'll have the head boys track coach reading all female-centric YA books. And it's this wonderful community that evolves. In terms of how we get these lists that we are able to cultivate, it's because we really seek all input in terms of creating these fresh lists.
You remind me, before we do talk about what's on these lists, how do you ensure that the books are, given how diverse they are, that they are appropriate for the age of the students reading them?
We've always structured it for our readers who are on this committee to look through the lens of a student, not through our own lens. Sometimes we make the mistake of, I'm looking through like a 55-year-old person's lens. That is not our target audience. We have to center ourselves often as we go through the year and we're selecting these books. There's not a book that gets put on the list that isn't reviewed by someone on the committee. And we talk about some of the issues that we will see that will pop up and whether or not they're appropriate for summer reading. One of the biggest things is a lot of YA is a lot of gloom and doom. We try not to do anything that's too heavy where a student could be thrown into turmoil or triggered some way. Try to avoid things like that. Those are discussions that we have throughout the year by the committee members who are reading the books. And oftentimes we'll ask for a second reader on a book. If someone has some questions, we have a spreadsheet where there's a first reader and they'll put in some ideas or some feedback on what they're reading, and then they'll ask for a second reader. And so then we'll have a second reader who reads the book. If it is problematic, we'll remove it from the list. We want to make sure that we support our students because we know that this is going to be something that's not done under the guidance of an instructor. Most of the time we'll be alone in reading this. And so we don't want to place too many heavy burdens on them.
With that being said, that doesn't mean that we avoid topics that potentially may be perceived as controversial, right?
Right.
We're not necessarily censoring text. What we're doing is we're looking for text to identify, is this a text that should be read or can be read alone versus a text that should be read with support. That's the benefit of having staff members with different expertise read a text. In the past, I've actually said, to one of our social workers who I know is a reader and has helped us out from time to time, hey, this was a recommendation from a staff member. We really need a second read on this though. Can you take a look at this and let me know, is this a text that would really require potentially some classroom support or instructional support or even more or not? We have these different lenses that help us guide that decision process. We also have a launch event, and that's also where some of the magic of this program really comes in. And we cultivate buy-in community around that. And we are able to sell certain books to freshmen. There's a difference between freshmen and seniors in the high school space.
And I'm glad that we are going to talk about what it looks like from launch through conclusion. Before we get there, though, one thing, Bev, Katie and I were talking about on the last podcast, I was really surprised when Katie said that one of the books recently on your list was a cookbook. Who would have thought a cookbook? Maybe tell me, what ends up on that list? It's fascinating to me.
It's varied. Every year it's a mystery. The list gets put together and we have come January or February where, oh my gosh, the list isn't together and we don't have all of the titles that we need. And so there's a lot of stress at that point.
Scary.
It is. And there's some years that have been much better than others where we're like, oh, this list came together great. This year was not one of those. The cookbook was an interesting addition. I'm glad you brought that up because first of all, I have a healthy respect for our culinary classes and program at Niles North. They do wonderful things with students. They really immerse them in cooking and they see potentials for themselves in that as a career. It came from our knowledge and our interaction with those classes. And then when we searched for a cookbook, we searched for something that wasn't just recipes, but that also told stories. There's a story behind recipes. A lot of times they're connected to culture and family history. There's a richness to that. That was a hot ticket.
It allows us that wonderful opportunity to honor at-home literacies, which is something that we're always striving to do. As a reading specialist, especially when I had the opportunity to sit down and do more one-on-one assessments, that part of the assessment where you sit down and there's that qualitative piece where you do the interview, really learn and understand how reading and literacy is practiced in a student's home. That is one of the most important parts of that assessment overall. Is so often overlooked, especially when we look at so much computerized testing right now. If we really want to run a literacy assessment, we have to be considering at-home literacies in addition to more formalized in-school literacy. Because are we looking at a coding mismatch, or are we actually looking at comprehension and understanding? If we need to identify the missing pieces so that we can actually remediate, that's what we need to do instead of just mislabeling and misidentifying. This cookbook concept, it was fantastic. And also, as a reading teacher, when I taught a reading class, sequencing, right? There's so many different important critical strategies that are involved in cooking. Can you follow a recipe? Can you write a recipe? Yes, I love books. Yes, I love reading, but I don't have some book that you can't rip from my hands. I want kids reading and engaging and understanding and growing their skills. It's all about how I can trick you how to do that.
Bev, were you going to add something there?
From the perspective of more of the human connection also, I mean, a cookbook allows a student to go home and perhaps involve other members of the family or delve into maybe a culture of food that they're not familiar with. That's very important to us also, to have a diverse number of texts, not only for a student to see themselves in it, but also to share that with the greater community of students that are at Niles North. We have about 60 plus languages, I would say, that are spoken in the homes. And we celebrate that diversity. We feel it's one of our strengths.
It's interesting you talk about that diversity. When I was looking at the sample list, other books on there that really surprised me. But again, Bev, you were saying it's not about what we would read. It's about what the students would read. Having that joy in reading. Students can still learn those traditional reading and writing skills in a book that might not be traditionally assigned. I was also very intrigued by the Britney Spears entry.
We try to do a lot of readable nonfiction also that students are aware of and is engaging. Our students know enough about Britney Spears and her history, and it really delved into her side of the story, which we didn't always get in the media, especially as a child star, and her having been taken advantage of. It was just a great read, and we put it on there, and we thought that a lot of students would pick it up, and they did. That was actually one of the more popular titles as well.
And they did pick it up, and they picked up the cookbook. If they're engaged with it authentically, you're more likely to talk about it. And that is also a critical piece to the comprehension process. Here I am again. I know I'm talking about the science of reading. You read about it. Now what are you going to do about it? We also have this goal with the program. Bev and I have always wanted to focus on cultivating more real life reading experiences for our students now. And of course, we need to have the scaffolded classroom experiences, but then how else do we create and mimic these real life experiences around literacy? And in the real world, you don't read a book and make a poster. You don't read a book and write a book report. You read a book and you talk to a friend about it. You say, hey, I had this great recipe and I put it together. You might be interested in this. These little kernels of real life literacy, that's the key to continued practice after high school.
We see on the day of the event when students come in and they're able to hear some book talks and select their books. It's interesting to be an observer of how the students are selecting books. Some of them will select a book that's the same as a friend of theirs because they plan to read it together. And then they have a built-in little book group that they can read the book with. And then others make plans with, oh, I'm going to get this one, you get that one, and we can switch in the summer. There's all these little plans of students and how they want to engage with the book.
The thing I really found fascinating about your list, I noticed that you had books that would be traditionally something a young girl would read, and then you had books that stereotypically might be read by a young man. I liked even the diversity you had there because it was clear to me that you did also consider gender as well. Found that really fascinating, particularly if we're looking at helping our young men to stay engaged in reading, which doesn't always happen, partially based on the selections that schools make in terms of what students are reading. I hope I'm making sense with that.
Absolutely. One of our missions in the library is that every student who walks into the doors of the library sees themselves reflected in some way in the library. We keep that in the back of our minds also when we're building this list. We definitely, when we have the spreadsheet, we have a column for representation. The title goes on there. We have a space for what genre it is and what the reading level is, because we want to have a very wide scope. And representation is definitely an important part of that. If we're missing something, then oftentimes we'll go looking for that.
We really do strive to find that representation written by authors who share that identity. And we do that because we also want to make sure that we are representing students' identities in a way that is not tokenized. Students really want to experience finding themselves in a book authentically, living their lives as they are. And that's been the feedback that we've received from our students.
Students have a variety of reasons for selecting text also. Sometimes it is, oh, I see myself in that book. Other times it's just, wow, that sounded really great. I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to read it. Choice has always been the driving force.
It doesn't always have to be deep. We always have a comedy on there,
We always have a manga, graphic novel. We have a wide range of things. We were very specific about adding a self-help component, something simple. We always ran it past the social workers, but we were very mindful as we saw our students struggling that we put something on there that students could choose if they wanted to work on themselves.
Bev and her staff have always done an incredible job being mindful and paying attention to what is being taken out of the library. Definitely informs our lists. Having conversations with our students, the list has expanded over the years in terms of genre because noticed there is a population that isn't finding something that they need. That's cue to us, go find it.
It's good to step out of our comfort zone. We spend so much time in our spaces in schools that we forget sometimes how books are being displayed in other areas. And so it's been really valuable for us to take a day and to go to a public library and to an independent bookstore and to a larger bookstore to see what other people are reading and what they're showcasing. Every year that we've done that, we found a book to put onto the list.
Also resonating for me, librarian Amanda Jones came on the show, was talking about the way she partners with classroom teachers and helping classroom teachers develop their classroom libraries. Your summer reading program and the collaboration you two have is clearly showing the potency of those classroom teacher librarian partnerships that speak highly of the need to continue funding and having libraries. Let's take the conversation in the direction of how you plan for this. Take me from launch to conclusion. What does that look like as an exemplar? If there are other schools out there or other educators out there listening to this podcast, if they're thinking, I want to replicate that, let's go there first. Tell me about your program from start to finish.
One, we have to start with some of the basics. You have to consider funding, or you can dive into the exciting stuff. There are some real realities. Scale and scope are important. There have been some years where we have operated with specific titles based on cost. Can you do hardcover? Can you do paperback only? Can you do new releases? You can pull together a great list regardless of what your parameters are, but it may require more research. Get your parameters structured. Do you need to look for grant funding? Have a conversation with your district office or your principal right away.
I would agree. I would think that that's probably the biggest hurdle. We've been very lucky in always having a lot of district and building support for the summer reading program. Ebbs and flows also, depending on how much money is there for it. It's not of the highest priority. There are other things that are more important than summer reading. But yes, funding's a big one, especially since it's our goal to get a book into the hands of any student who would like to read. I have to say, we've done this for over a decade. What is this, like maybe our 13th or 14th year doing this? And it's gone through many iterations based on what our budget was and who we were trying to bring into the library. From start to finish, we start at the very beginning of the school year. A month in, we try and get an idea of who wants to be on the committee again. We have some long-standing members, and every year we pick up new members, and maybe sometimes members drop off depending on their workload. But we always have a nice cross-section of the school on the committee. Then we start a Google spreadsheet and we just start to add titles that we find interesting that we'd like to review. It's shared with everybody, and you can see we usually add the title, the author, and a blurb about the book. And then there's a column for anybody who wants to read it, and we'll order it, and we'll try and get it to the hands of, any staff member who wants to read it. And then it just moves from there. We have some check-in points with our committee. It ebbs and flows from there. Things get thrown onto the list. It'll get removed and something else will get added to it. And like magic, it comes together of January or February.
These committee conversations that we have are really, truly enjoyable. We have been told by our members throughout the years that this is often the one committee that they
love.
love all their committees. But, people feel good going here because they're literally engaging in a book talk, in a conversation, and they know it's going to contribute to the culture of the school and to kids. It's a feel-good space. People are heard, they're valued. We have norms that surround that, and these norms are the regular expectations of the group. It's been cultivated over time, but it's a very positive, collaborative team.
After you do all this legwork, when is the launch and what do you do at the launch?
Pre-COVID, we used to bring in all of our freshmen, sophomores, and juniors into the library. We'd invite our public librarians in to help us book talk to all of those students. So we would have sometimes 3 different book talks with 30 kids in them, sometimes 90 students in the library, where we try to get through the entire list. Because in those days we had about 25 titles on there and we only have a 42-minute period. And then they had to select a book also. It was challenging to get through the list. But it's something also that we sent out prior to students coming in. We usually do a LibGuide, it's a platform that we subscribe to where we can make a page on a book and we can add videos and text and links to our catalog and to the audiobooks and the ebooks, which we always carry from our Sora platform. We usually would send that out first to students. And then when they came in, they already had kind of an idea of maybe what they wanted to gravitate towards, and then spent maybe 20 minutes book talking to students, and then they would select. When COVID happened, we didn't want to let go of summer reading. We did a digital version of it. And so we ended up partnering with Barnes & Nobles, where we did, again, a LibGuide. We sent it out to all students, and we ended up shipping a book to each of their homes.
During COVID, the work actually became more important than ever because really what we were realizing was summer reading became the only print book that many of our students were receiving and that some of our students had. Being able to partner to ship books to students at a wonderful rate locally was such a wonderful gift to be a part of that partnership with Barnes & Noble at the time. That was a big paradigm shift in the program in terms of how we focused on communication.
That was really important during COVID. And then after COVID, for a couple of years, we did not have our in-person. We were still masking. We felt like it wasn't appropriate for us to bring in that many students into our space. Students were able to select from this LibGuide that we created, and the librarians did most of the book talks for them. So there would be a little 30 to 60-minute book talk on each of the books so they could get a taste of what the book was about. And then they would place digital orders, and we would deliver those orders to the English classrooms, and the teachers would distribute them before the end of the school year. Last year was the first year where we brought students back into our space again, and we reimagined once again what this could potentially look like.
The exciting point of being able to reimagine the programming, we're able to bring the best of both programs together. So having this digital access to information and then also the in-person piece together. The other real benefit of the programming from beginning to end is that this regular norm of book talking and book talking to our students to get them interested in reading. And that has become just regular practice in all of our classes.
Would you say that some of the magic is in what students do with this reading? Katie, you keep mentioning book talks and discussions. Is that the work that emanates from students taking a book and reading?
A lot of the magic happens when they pick up the book. Where we've gone with this is having different interactive stations where students get to interact with the text in different ways. Some of it's book talking, some of it's different activities surrounded by genre. We have different opportunities for students to interact with the text, and those stations will change from year to year. And I should add, the other piece is our staff reads along with our students. We advertise who's reading what. We are all part of this in terms of advertising the books, the PR around it, and then the day of event. When I say that's where the magic happens, it's because the excitement happens there, and then we have to get them reading. So we've had several different versions that we've worked on from year to year. There's been Drop Everything and Read, where students bring their books to school. The entire school will do sit and read at the same time.
For the summer?
No, it usually was the day after our break for books. So students had their books in their hands and there was an expectation for a certain amount of time. I think it usually was tacked on to one of the periods where
Got it.
everybody would just stop and you would read, start the process of getting into
Makes
the
sense.
book. But we had years where it was a much bigger project, where in the fall we would come back and we actually had an altered bell schedule and students would go to different rooms based on what they had read. And there would be a facilitator there to lead a discussion, a book discussion. And those were the years that were insanely busy when we came back in the fall to try and organize something of that magnitude. That happened for several years.
And we have brought in authors either at the launch or during the after. I will say one of the reasons we decided to forego the post event, it wasn't because of the workload. We still found ourselves going back to that old school mentality of you read a book and now we're going to expect you to come back and talk about it. Even if you loved it, do you remember what you read, John, 2 months ago, enough to come and have a full conversation on it? It was a good attempt. It was that first step away from the back to school quiz. Seen the mark just a little bit though, because that's not really what it's about. It wasn't about coming back and saying, talk to me about what you read. It's about what happens during.
I think it was about letting go of the control also. We're so used to having control and wanting a real specific outcome. I'm a former English teacher also. I always operate in that, well, what are they getting from it? And how do we know that? But one of the really interesting discussions that we had was, well, what happens if we don't do anything? What if it's just about the joy of getting a book and the hope that they read it? And if they don't read it this year, maybe it stays on their shelf. Maybe they go to college. Hey, no, I never read that book. I'm going to backtrack and get it. It was interesting what happened when we just let go and said, we're going to do this more for choice and for hoping that students are going to pick up the book during the summer and they're going to read it and engage with it however they want to engage with it. We're not going to put any parameters on that. That was a struggle for us as well. We want students to re-engage with reading. How do we do that? That they're going to make it a lifelong choice. And maybe this is the start of that.
Have you ever had any students on the committee?
We have not had students formally sit on the committee because the way that it is right now, we don't meet as a committee. We do a lot through just digitally. It's very difficult in our current situation and the way our current schedule is for everybody to find a common time to sit down and really delve into committee work. And that's one of the reasons we haven't done that. It's a great idea. We still try to figure out how that could potentially work because we do want students to be able to have a voice on the committee.
Had a student panel in the past, had our upperclassmen come and speak to our freshmen in the auditorium about their reader experience with summer reading. Yes. I think the short answer is yes, but they're not necessarily on the broader panel, but on the full committee. But we've had many panels of students.
What have we not talked about that you want the listeners to know?
I really do honestly believe that this has been the most pivotal point in developing and fostering a culture of literacy in a large high school setting, which is very difficult to do. I think it's critical.
Ladies, where can people find out more about you, the work you do? Where can people find you?
They can find me on the Niles North website, Niles North High School website. There is a library page there and there's contact information there.
You can find me. I have a website, ourlitlab.com, ourlitlab.com, and my contact information is there.
Thank you both for your time. I hope folks are going to listen to this episode and get really excited about the ways that they can get students, particularly high school students, excited about reading. So thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.